You know that feeling, right? You're in a heated argument with a colleague, maybe even a family member over dinner, and you walk away just replaying it in your head, thinking, man, if I was just a little smarter, a little quicker, I could have won that. We all do it. We try to sharpen our arguments for the next time.
But what if that's the wrong goal entirely? What if the most valuable skill we can build isn't thinking faster or arguing harder, but actually getting better at rethinking? That's what we're going to dive into.
And to see why this is so important, let's start with a massive, high-stakes, real-world example of what happens when a brilliant leader and an entire company refuses to rethink.
I mean, just look at the speed of this collapse. It's staggering. In 2009, BlackBerry was literally on top of the world. Everybody who was anybody had one. But its inventor, Mike Lasardes, he was so certain that his vision was the right one, that phones were just for calls and email, that he just couldn't see the revolution that the iPhone was starting. His conviction, the very thing that made him successful, ended up being his company's downfall.
And look, the BlackBerry story, it isn't some one-off thing. It's a warning sign. The average person back in 2011 was consuming 5 times more information every single day than in 1986. At that kind of pace, stubbornly sticking to your guns isn't a virtue anymore. It's a huge liability. Rethinking is no longer a nice little skill to have. It's become a critical tool for survival. So, okay, how do we fight back against this dangerous conviction? Well, the solution is to adopt a totally different way of thinking, one that values curiosity and evidence way more than intuition and just being right. We have to learn to think like scientists.
Most of us spend our time in one of two modes, preacher or prosecutor. We're either preaching our own beliefs to anyone who will listen, or we're prosecuting anyone who dares to disagree with us. But as scientists, they start with questions. They treat their ideas like a hypothesis that needs to be tested. One study actually found that startup founders who thought like scientists were way more successful, mainly because they were willing to pivot and change course when the data told them their first plan wasn't working.
And this points to something really critical. We're often completely blind to our own blindness. It's a real thing. It's called incompetence blindness. Researchers have found that the people who score the absolute lowest on things like logic puzzles or even humor tests are the most likely to have a wildly overinflated view of their own skills. They literally don't know what they don't know, so why would they ever need to rethink?
So the antidote to this is humility. But let's be super clear about what that means. Humility isn't about having low self-confidence. In fact, it's the opposite. Confidence is your belief in your ability to achieve a goal. Humility is having the wisdom to question if you're using the right methods to get there. It's what lets you separate your ego from your ideas so you can actually learn something new.
Okay, so we've worked on our internal mindset. But how does this change the way we actually talk to other people? When it comes to persuasion, most of us picture a battle, right? A tug of war. But what if it's not a fight at all? What if it's more like a dance?
Master negotiators, they do things that seem totally counterintuitive. First, they find common ground. They'll actually concede smaller points to build trust and show they're reasonable. They also know that just piling on a ton of weak arguments is a bad idea. It just gives the other person easy targets to attack, which weakens your whole case. And most importantly, they ask a lot of curious questions.
And get this, the numbers totally back this up. The absolute best negotiators end the full 20% of their statements with a genuine question. That's double the rate of average negotiators. They're not prosecuting, they are genuinely trying to understand.
Okay, that's great for the boardroom, but does this stuff work out in the real world? What about those deep, dug-in beliefs that feel totally impossible to change? Well, yeah. Turns out, these exact same principles have worked in some of the most extreme situations you can possibly imagine. Take the musician Daryl Davis. This guy, he did something incredible. He made it his mission to sit down and talk with members of the Ku Klux Klan. He wasn't there to attack them. He just came armed with a simple, honest question. His goal was to help them realize that their beliefs were often just an accident of birth. And this simple act of curious conversation has led hundreds of Klansmen to renounce their racism and leave the KKK for good. And you see this same principle, listening over lecturing, in a totally different world, with a doctor nicknamed the Vaccine Whisperer. Dr. Gainier persuades anti-vax parents not by shouting facts at them, but through something called motivational interviewing. He asks open-ended questions. He actually listens to their fears. By acknowledging their concerns and affirming their right to choose, he lowers their defenses, which helps them find their own motivation to change their minds. He's not forcing a rethink. He's creating the space for one to happen. The common thread in all these stories is avoiding what's called binary bias.
Just think about the climate change debate. By framing it as believers versus deniers, we force people into corners. You have to pick a team. But the reality is a huge, complex spectrum of opinions. When you actually present that complexity, instead of a simple black and white choice, you encourage people to engage with the ideas instead of just digging in their heels.
So what happens when we scale this idea up from individuals to entire organizations? Well, the stakes can become incredibly high. We're talking quite literally life or death, as we saw in a tragic event at NASA.
During the 2003 Columbia Space Shuttle disaster, NASA was operating under what's known as a strict performance culture. Excellence was the only goal, which meant failure was not an option. Because of that, engineers who had doubts were actually afraid to speak up. But in a learning culture, the priority is growth. Errors aren't punished. They're treated like valuable data. Rethinking isn't a sign of weakness, it's just a normal part of the process.
And what makes a learning culture possible all comes down to one crucial thing: psychological safety. It's that gut feeling that you can take a risk, that you can admit you made a mistake or challenge an old way of doing things without being shamed or punished for it. Without psychological safety, rethinking on a big scale is impossible, and tragedies like the Columbia disaster become almost inevitable.
When you boil it all down, the entire message here is captured in this one powerful idea. Whether it's in our own heads, in our relationships, or in the places we work, true progress, real learning, real innovation, it only happens when we have the courage to let go of certainty.
So where do we start? How do we actually make rethinking a regular practice in our own lives? What's the one thing, the single most actionable thing you can change today that will make all the difference?
It all starts with a simple but really profound shift. Stop anchoring your identity in your opinions and start anchoring it in your values. Things like curiosity, integrity, or excellence. Your beliefs and opinions, they should just be tools to help you live out your values, but they're disposable. When you define yourself by your values, changing your mind about something isn't a threat to who you are. It's just an update. It's a sign that you're truly committed to learning. And that right there is the true power of rethinking.